So welcome everybody. This is the fourth in a series of 7 sessions called Radical Presence, based on material from GreenChristian. Although we've diverted a little bit more this week from that material. And this session is called Flesh. Welcome, my name's Imogen Nay.
And I'm Andy Griffiths, and I'm interested we're talking about flesh today because I think Christianity has sometimes been a bit shy about flesh.
There have certainly been some very unhelpful versions of Christianity from day one, but the real Christianity, in my view, isn't shy about flesh at all. From the very beginning, God created the world and our bodies and all flesh, and God declared it all good, indeed very good. It's Gnostics who have said something different.
And can you explain to us what's a Gnostic?
Gnostic, spelt with a Gnostic, was a religious movement that started in the Eastern Mediterranean just about the same time as Christianity. It was a pretty diverse movement, but we do pick up hints from it in the New Testament. And they generally believed that the physical world was a bad thing, the human body was a bad thing, and that it was the spirit inside that was sort of trapped inside the body, and it was longing to be set free.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of weeks ago on Facebook, somebody shared a meme with, like, you know, a nice picture of the countryside. Over the top, it said, "You're not a body with a spirit inside, you're a spirit imprisoned in a body."
That's Gnosticism, and it does pop up all over in our culture still, and it might even be part of our own sort of Christian experience. And there might be parts of us that, you know, are kind of drawn to Gnosticism, the idea that this sort of inhabited world that we experience with all its complexities and vulnerability of being flesh, that we could escape that by being a spirit and escape some of the vulnerabilities of what it means to be human and created. But I think a true Christianity, which believes in the incarnation, Jesus, the second person of the Trinity as flesh. Some forms of early Christianity argued that Jesus only seemed to be flesh. He only appeared to be flesh. But that was also a heresy that was knocked back. So Christians do believe that the physical world is good, and Jesus being incarnated as human is one of the strongest indicators of that. So the Christian hope isn't that one day that we will all be destroyed and our souls will float up into some clouds. It's that there'll be a whole new creation, a new heaven and earth, a renewed green earth with resurrection bodies. And we don't know what that's going to look like, but we believe in the resurrection of the body.
And we say it, those of us that say creeds, every week. When we say, I believe in the resurrection of the body, we don't mean I believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus, though as a matter of fact we do. We mean we believe that is our hope, not something disembodied, but an actual bodily resurrection.
Yeah, and it's hard, isn't it? Because you know, when we talk about heaven, I think we're all probably a bit Gnostic, because we sort of imagine this sort of place in the clouds where we're all happy with God. But actually, the proper Jewish understanding of the end of time is this creation of a new heaven and a new earth, and a Christian understanding too. And you've picked this poem that Catherine's going to read for us that sort of helps us sort of understand that concept a bit more.
I love the very thought of heaven, where angels sing in perfect perpetual choir practice, where Father, Son, and Spirit rule unchallenged and are honoured in full measure. I love the very thought of heaven. But I was not made to live there. I was not made to walk on clouds and bask eternally in immaterial splendour. I was made for this green planet, this tight ball of aching beauty, alive with the unending possibilities of his creative power. I was made for the sunshine that blazes through the veins of a leaf and glints on the tiny, perfect back of a ladybird crossing my arm. I was made to be human in this most human of places. I was made for earth. The earth is my home. That's why I'm glad that God, more than anyone, is a friend of the earth, prepared as he was to die for its release. And that's why I'm glad that the magnificent jeweled foundations of the mighty pearly gates will be anchored deeply and forever in the soil of earth.
Catherine, thank you. That's beautifully read. So real Christianity cares about the earth. It cares about the earth because of creation, where God said it was really good. It cares about bodies and the earth because Jesus became properly bodily human with real matter and a full human being. And it cares because the hope of Christians has to do with this planet, not some other strange world. So Christianity doesn't just say things. That's the thing. It's not about ideas, first and foremost. Its words become flesh and move into the neighborhood.
That's a wonderful sentence. The words become flesh and move into the neighborhood. And that sets up this project that we're continuing this week. Last week, Andy and I shared with you the time is now and their declaration to the Prime Minister about the things that they wanted to see, if you like, infleshed in our communities. What I'd like us to do, or Andy and I would like us to do this week, is whether we as a group could come up with a similar declaration, fleshing out some real tangible things that we believe God wants to see happen in our communities. Because like Andy, I'm completely committed to an incarnational faith, not a faith just of ideas in the sky, but of embodied reality and change.
And the thing, so we're looking for three things, but we're not looking for sort of general impractical ideas. We're looking for three things that could be achieved. And by looking for them, we'll be saying we will do our part to turn words into flesh, to make ideas action. We were talking last time that there is always a cost to putting your money where your mouth is, or in this case, putting your flesh where your words are.
It might be that we really want to tap down into our local communities and focus on something which appears to be quite small, but actually that we could achieve and then build on. Three big issues, first of all, so that we did a bit of brainstorming. So obviously, really, so we went for green issues, systemic injustice, and then global citizenship / human dignity. So they were our headliners. In terms of green issues, I was really advocating the eco-church model, and a small next step for people who hadn't encountered it to research it and have a look at it as a programme for change in our local communities. In terms of systemic injustice, we talked about community organising and Citizens UK when people were really interested to learn more about that form of change. So Andy, you might be able to help us in a minute with that. And then global citizenship, human dignity, a bit more challenging. But we talked about being brave enough to challenge our friends in conversation if they were talking in a way that to us seemed to dehumanize or demean other human beings, for example, refugees. cultivating more compassion and talking about these issues?
Well, I think, Andy, in lots of ways, Imogen's kind of just giving you our next step.
Sorry.
But one of the conversations we had was the kind of the impacting as individuals and as small groups on big national political issues, and trying to find ways that we could perhaps both make a small change as individuals, which was why we were so interested in community organisers and other vehicles for doing that.
Just chip in from my contribution, just making the observation that silence is good, but for me it only makes sense when it comes between periods of intense activity and talk and action and thinking, to give us the chance just to take stock in a very noisy and busy world. It's as if as a society we've got to make use of every single minute and second of activity and noise and so forth. So there's the silence just to take stock and to pray, but also as preparation and almost breathing in the strength and the state of preparedness for what then comes. And for me, little nuggets of silence or little sort of bite-sized chunks of silence works best to help us make that connection.
I talked about people going to church and for weddings and funerals is one thing, but the attractiveness of a church building. But one of the things we spoke about also was making sure that the church, it's got the time now. The church needs to change, needs to embrace. The church needs to lead and be at the front coming out of the pandemic, not sort of shuffling on behind and trying to catch itself up to where it was before. So we kind of need to have a proper detailed plan on how we're going to do and come out of this to and be there for the people, so we become the first choice. The church is the first choice to support the people, look after the people, especially those who are going to be in need when we come out of the pandemic, more so, who have lost jobs and can't put food on the table.
So we were playing, weren't we, with the idea not only that maybe you don't have to be in that building at a certain time on a Sunday morning to be the church, but also the idea that those church buildings might be usable in all sorts of ways, not least for the green agenda. And I guess that fits very much with what the other group was saying about eco-church, that Phil was telling us about a recent report called The House of Good, which is about using church buildings for the common good. And that seems to make loads of sense, that sort of initiative.
Can I just say that we, at our church at the moment, we use the church outside of normal church hours to do the environmental workshops that we did. We had 7 or 8 of them. They were all within the church building. So there was no, everyone came, everyone felt comfortable, children came. And the important thing as well, I didn't mention it earlier, was the fact that we get children there. Very important. Young people, teenagers, starting very young and very old. So you've got the wisdom, but you've also got the youth and enthusiasm, and people there that from all different kind of careers. So, you know, people who are a scientist there, if you've got one, if you're lucky enough, an astronaut, if you can find one, a project manager, somebody from quality control, someone for all walks of life, a nurse, someone from the medical, someone who's works for charities, a good mix of people.
Thought that this whole, well, both approaching the climate crisis and also the pandemic, that this had been an interesting time for having to make hope a bit more intentional, especially within the faith community, and whether that's by our actions to local communities, like a lot of people were talking about the even if it's just helping your neighbours or having compassion and empathy with more vulnerable people in the community around you. But also that in the face of so much uncertainty, faith communities can be quite a good way of embodying that hope and using that as a way to get through, especially with more lockdowns and things like that.
So Andy, we're moving towards a declaration, and I really believe that change happens through small groups of people getting a conviction about what to do and being willing to both say it and act accordingly. And I think we've got such a group of people here. And Andy, I know you've got involved in community organising, and I'm really interested to hear more about their theory of how change happens.
You can see community organising lots of different ways. You could see it as a tradition, for example, and like all traditions, there were people who formed it, people like Saul Alinsky and Barack Obama and Raymond Fung and Angus Rich and Caitlin Harland and so on. Or you could see it as a set of tools. Or you could see it as a rule of life, but you can also see it as a process for bringing change. Barack Obama talks about the world as it is and the world as it should be. And we live in the world as it is, obviously. But there's something inside us that longs for the world as it should be. So we want to change the world as it is to be a little bit more like the world as it should be. And that's the basis for community organising. And we can't do it by ourselves. The community organisers say individual activists and charismatic individuals trying to change the world is particularly useless. What we need is a whole movement of people, call it civil society sometimes. And that stage of joining together with others is the organising stage. That's stage one of the theory of change. You don't decide where the bus is going and then get people to get on the bus. You get as many people from civil society on the bus as you can, and you build relationships, and then you work out democratic ways to decide where the bus is going to go.
And when you talk about civil society,
yeah, so civil society means anywhere people gather, online or offline, that isn't business and isn't the state. So civil society could be unions, it could be mosques, Facebook groups, churches, universities, residents' associations, table tennis clubs. That all of them could, in theory, be civil society. Another word that community organisers use is this term creative minorities. That's the theory that change only comes about where there is a creative minority that's calling for that change. But ideally, you've got each creative minority in alliance with the others. So you haven't got the unions trying to bring about one change, and the churches trying to bring about another change, and the mosques trying to bring about another change. You've got lots of creative minorities cooperating with each other, and then real change happens.
and I suppose you could say our very small radical presence group is a sort of creative minority.
Exactly. And so we've sent the group away to do stage 2 in the theory of change, which is listening. There's no point planning till we've listened. And for Christians, the listening has to include especially listening to those who are on the margins, listening to those who are the poorest, but also listening to God. Listening to God through stillness and through scripture.
And then there's the planning. Yeah,
and you'll notice planning is written in small letters. Community organisers distrust planning with a capital P. Planning by the man, and it is usually a man with a plan who thinks that he knows how things ought to go and is going to get everyone else to follow the plan. Community organisers tend to think that's no good at all. So there's a couple of jokes in community organising that are almost always given, and one of them is this one: the only thing that can be successfully built from the top down is a hole.
Oh dear. That's very good. A lot to teach the church then, I think, there, Andy. And following on from that, there's action. And I guess that fits in a bit with what we've just been saying in our session, that action can't stay in the realms of ideas and brains, although ideas and brains are fundamental to our experience of the world and reflecting on it. But it has to be earthed in reality and practice and flesh. And for us as Christians, that's fundamental to what we believe, because the word became flesh and dwelt among us. God didn't stay as an idea in the heavens, but indwelt in our real, actual communities.
Exactly. And this is action of a specific type. Real change, community organisers think, comes through action through public storytelling. And we could talk a bit more about that in another session.
That sounds fascinating, because the church is good at storytelling. So I'm really interested in that. And the final stage is about getting everyone a seat around the table. Now, I imagine that's quite challenging.
Yeah, it's about getting people to the negotiating table. So here's the other community organising joke. And it goes like this: if you haven't got a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. But within the church, it's also about having flat teams, tables, rather than hierarchies and triangles. And in the ultimate sense, I think this is about what Christians call evangelism. As we act as a creative minority in alliance with other creative minorities for justice and the common good, people start to be provoked to ask questions about why we're doing this. And often that ends up with us being able to invite them to be in the best place possible, which is with a seat at the banquet of the kingdom of God.
And when you were talking then, Andy, I was really reminded of how Jesus invited all the peoples on the margins of society to eat with him. You know, I think of him calling Zacchaeus down from the tree, the tax collector, and he being condemned by the Pharisees. Why is he eating with the prostitutes and the tax collectors? So that idea of Jesus inviting the disempowered and the voiceless, or the rejected and the judged, to sit at a table with him, it really, really powerful. So I want to thank you, Andy, for sharing with me a bit about community organising and the tools and what change looks like in that process. And I know that people in the group will be really interested to listen in as well and get involved in this change making process.